Hello, I'm Paul Orselli, and today I am lucky to be joined by Darcie Fohrman, all the way on the West Coast where our technology is crossing the country here. How are you, Darcie?
I'm great, Paul. Thanks. How are you?
I'm good too. So, Darcie, what's just one thing about exhibits that you would like to share with people?
Well, I've given it some thought, and my just one thing is that exhibitions are valuable when they're catalysts for conversations. And I think that occurs when visitors are emotionally engaged and given opportunities to participate in the conversation.
Awesome. Well, I know you have, like me, you've worked on lots of different projects. Are there any particular projects that you've worked on that you think, sort of show this off to advantage these kinds of spaces?
You know, I've actually last year was 50 years doing exhibits.
Good for you.
It's a little hard to comprehend. And I look back over all that time, and I realized I was most influenced in my work by emotionally engaging projects. And some of those were early on, back in the 1980s, like at the National Museum of American History. You remember Field to Factory? And you had to choose whether you went through a white or colored doorway. And, that just gets you when you are brought into that conversation and realize the choices. Another one, a great one there, was More Perfect Union. And there was a Japanese internment camp, and you were looking at this inside one of these cabins and see the granddaughter and walk by on a screen past the screen door and stop, and this video, they're talking to each other, the grandfather and the granddaughters telling her what happened to him. And there's been so many influences, and I could give you more. And I think the projects that that I personally worked on that brought the visitors into the conversation, and I hope because of this effort to try to emotionally engage people, were well, like at the early job at the Spertus Museum in Chicago. I worked there for a long time, in really the 70s, and that was my first job. And we did a Holocaust, one of the first Holocaust exhibits in the country, and it was really very small, but it was called Remember. And we had visitors be able to actually, so simple, just place a stone after they went through this exhibition, and they could place a stone on the video monitor where they were seeing this a short video about what happened. But people were moved to do that. And then I went to the art museum in San Diego and did lots of exhibitions, big temporary exhibitions. And in order to get people engaged, I kind of had this immersive, this idea for art exhibitions to do things that are immersive and let visitors get to know something about the art, about the objects, or about the artist, or about the collector. See the curator's voice, have it feel like they're the curators talking to the visitors. And I guess I am going on too long probably, but
No.
The Daniel story we did 30 years ago, and it's still there at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. And we just worked on redoing the last two sections of that. And really, that, for those who don't know, creates an immersive experience. And so going through seeing the Holocaust through one child's eyes and really reading his diary and seeing his drawings, and he's talking to you.
Well, that's, I
Sorry.
was going to say, no, I was going to say that that particular exhibition, I would say is a classic. And I mean, obviously it's still there for 30 years. So I mean, that
It was supposed to be temporary.
I know. So, you know, but one thing that strikes me, Darcie, about some of the examples you mentioned, I mean, obviously the Holocaust or Japanese internment, or even to a lot of people, like trying to engage with an artist, like, I'm just curious, what do you think, or what advice would you give to people, other exhibit developers or designers? I'm going to say to break the fourth wall. You know, they talk about that in theater or movies, but, you know, these are tremendously deep topics. They're topics that to a lot of people, they might be apprehensive and even approaching. I mean, they're all three of those, I mean, on different levels. Japanese internment in the US, the Holocaust, like, oh, okay, what do I know? How can I engage with art? Like, I'm not an art person. So I'm just curious what you think about, or what advice you might have, like how to set up that emotional engagement and sort of have people break through that wall and not just be like, wow, I can't even deal with this topic. You know, this is too much for me.
I do think this applies to any topic. And you could think of the Monterey Bay Aquarium, where you just visited, that the design grabs you and you're brought into the story. They did a wonderful exhibition some years ago about Mexico's secret seas. And you were on this journey and, you know, reading the logs. I did a frogs exhibit at the Exploratorium, and we had visitors doing things, seeing real frogs, being a frog, relating the frogs to the human body, showing how poetry, all the text in the exhibition was haiku, and showing how frogs were used throughout history. So I think that the sort of in general, the way I approach it is to think about designing the space. First of all, you've got to grab people's attention. So nothing, you know, you have to do that. You have to tap into universal emotions and tie things into current issues or current things in people's lives. I think we have to really be able to clearly articulate our rationale and intention for doing the project, whatever the topic is, because if we don't know why it's important and why visitors should care, the visitors aren't going to know.
That's it. Let's underline that. If we don't care about it, why should the visitors care about it? Absolutely.
And a few other things that I think about are like seamlessly integrating the content, the voice, and the design. So the look and feel needs to communicate your message, you know, everything from the flow, the color, the lighting, the adjacencies, the graphics, even your PR and advertising. So you're getting this message. So you have to, you know, your message. And another thing that I've used and sort of came out of the Sites of Conscious group is they have this idea of the arc of dialogue. And the last few exhibits I did at the Levine Museum of the New South, which were more related to social issues, was to create an experience as an arc of discovery. So you start visitors off with ways to think about the topic and means for them to participate in the conversation. And whether that's internal or something to do or question or or a space there. We did intact groups would also come through, and there would be facilitated conversations at the end. So those are some of the things. And I think using storytelling, I think narrative lets, on a one-to-one basis, lets us into each other's lives and creates empathy. And then maybe if you do it well, draws you in to find out what happens. So there's a lot of great stuff written about how to be a good storyteller.
Yeah, well, when you mentioned the arc of discovery, I thought of, that is another type of narrative arc or sort of storytelling framework, to be like,
Right.
Okay, I got to bring people in. You have to hook people in. You have to sort of lead them down this journey with you. Like, well, okay, why should I care about frogs or Japanese internment
Right.
or Mexican seas, And then like,
Yeah,
oh,
and be
actually, I do
provocative.
care about them.
Yeah, well, if you're provocative, and you touch on universal themes and ways so they can identify with whatever the topic is.
So I'd just like to dig in a little bit here about the idea of this arc of discovery, or this narrative arc, and how you think about it when you're thinking about exhibitions and that. I mean, how do you think about it? Like, do you concentrate on the hook at first, or do you kind of want to step back and make sure you understand the whole arc yourself? What are you thinking about when you're sort of building up an exhibition narrative?
I have an example, so that might be the best way.
Yeah, sure.
I think it's not good to have formulas, and I don't really, I'm more of a practitioner than a theoretician. It grows out of having the right people at the table and during concept planning, and that has to be very, very intentional and very considered before you even begin. And my example is an exhibition that we did at the Levine Museum of the New South called NUEVOlution, and it's about Latinos in the New South. And the way we did that was Evelyn Arantes.
Yeah.
Of course. So I brought her in on this project. She was at the Oakland Museum, and we went and we were having these meetings, and, very different in the South. So that's a whole other consideration, is your audience. But what we came up with, and really it was Evelyn who thought of the word encuentros, and our big idea that could relate, hopefully, many people to the topic would be about encounters. But in Spanish, I think that it's even more, it's really connections in your encounters. And so we built the arc by starting with, I don't think these were the actual titles, but it was my encuentros, our encuentros, and then desired encuentros. So, and we touched on positive and negative things, but in the very beginning, there was almost like an icebreaker. And it was, in this case, it was a digital interactive, but you were asked different questions about your connections with your communities. They're trying to get people to just think about how this worked in their own lives, in their own communities, and then built from there. And the interactives that were throughout got people to question their own assumptions, learn about misconceptions, get some history, think about then communities. And they had opportunities with interactives where you could have conversations with others if you so choose. And then you could leave your own story at the end and talk about what you'd like the future to look like. So that's an example.
Yeah, well, it sounds like that framework deliberately set up those opportunities for emotional connections and emotional engagement with people,
Hopefully.
with with each other, and with the information in the exhibition also. So I think that's great. Well, I like that the one of the threads cutting through this entire conversation is about connection between people, whether it's the development team or whether it's the museum and the visitors, or the visitors between themselves. I think that's
good.
real,
Yeah.
I think that's a real goal in our work. Well, Darcie, I really appreciate you taking the time that we could connect together to talk about just one thing, about exhibits. That's awesome.
Thank you, Paul. And I really appreciate your contributions to the field with these videos, but also your teaching and your volunteering for all the organizations you work for.
Well, thank you. That's very nice to say. And the check's in the mail. No,
I won't hold my breath.
Yeah, that's right. Thanks, Darcie. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you, Paul. Bye-bye.